day, the Allies achieved only a shallow beachhead, far short of their objectives. 16th Panzer, meanwhile, deployed its artillery in the hills overlooking the beachhead and sent units to fortify the mountain passes north of Salerno. During the first 3 days, the division's main striking force was employed in counter-attacking British penetrations towards Monte Cassino airfield and the important road junction at Battipaglia. On the 12th, the German defences were strengthened by the arrival of the 29th Panzer Grenadiers, and elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division took over the defence of the northern passes. On the same day, the Germans recaptured Battipaglia, which had now changed hands 4 times in as many days. On the 13th, they launched an attack down the corridor of the Selle River, driving to within a mile of the shore. The main weight of the attack fell on the Americans, who were thrown into confusion and very nearly routed. Indeed, so serious was the situation in the American sector that plans were secretly drawn up for an emergency evacuation. This was only averted by accelerating the build-up of reinforcements in the beachhead and by calling for support fire from the warships. During these engagements, the fleet remained under almost incessant attack from the air. 2 cruisers and a battleship were crippled and forced to withdraw, and numerous smaller vessels were sunk, including a destroyer and several transports. On the following day, the Germans attacked again, but the line held, thanks to coordinated action by Allied ground and naval forces and strong support from the air. Over a 24-hour period, Allied tactical and strategic aircraft flew nearly 2,000 sorties over the battle zone, dropping some 1,400 tons of bombs. By the 15th, the crisis had largely passed. Allied reinforcements continued to pour ashore, and the beachhead was steadily strengthened and pushed out. On the 16th, German resistance in the American sector slackened significantly, and advance units of Clark's Fifth Army met up with forward reconnaissance patrols from Montgomery's 8th, which had been pushing steadily northwards against determined German rearguards. North and west of Salerno, the British component of Fifth Army still faced strong resistance and occasional counterattacks, but it soon became obvious that these were mainly rearguard actions, and that the Germans were in the process of a phased withdrawal to the north. The arrival of 8th Army brought the Battle of Salerno to an end and created a broad front across the Apennine spine of Italy. But the Allies had achieved far less than they had hoped. The landings had failed to exploit the opportunity provided by Italy's capitulation, and those in the Gulf of Salerno had almost met with disaster. In addition to the damage wrought on the invasion fleet, the Allies had suffered twice as many casualties as their outnumbered opponents. Indeed, Salerno had been a much tougher test for the Allies than the invasion of Sicily, and signalled German determination to hold on to Italy for as long as possible. From Salerno, the Allies made only slow progress, entering Naples on October the 1st, more than 2 weeks behind schedule. They found the city in ruins and the port unusable. What had not been damaged by Allied bombing had been systematically demolished by the Germans prior to their evacuation. Restoring order and repairing the port would take many more weeks, consuming valuable resources and further delaying the advance north. Between Naples and Rome, the Germans had reconnoitred several lines of defence. Clark's Fifth Army reached the first of those on the Volturno River on October the 8th. The line was held by 3 German divisions, but was only partially prepared and was not intended as a main line of defence. On the 16th, after a week of hard fighting, the Germans began falling back to another, hastily improvised and temporary line 15 miles to the rear. On the Adriatic coast, the British Eighth Army was also meeting stiff resistance. In early October, assault units crossed the Biferno River, but the intensity of the fighting brought the advance to a halt along the line of the River Trigno. During November, the Germans continued to pull back in stages, trading ground for time and inflicting heavy casualties on the pursuing Allies. The various dislocations and delays to the Allied timetable were now being felt by the troops on the ground. The Italian winter was setting in, and heavy rain was swelling the numerous streams and rivers, most of which ran directly across the Allied line of advance. Minor roads were often either flooded or churned to mud by the passage of so many tanks and heavy vehicles. Congestion of the few remaining major routes badly affected the movement of supplies and reinforcements. Closer to the front, the roads and main approaches were sown with mines and were often covered by enemy artillery. For the infantry, the weather brought misery, and the frustration of fighting in difficult and mountainous terrain against a skillfully retreating enemy drained morale. Compared to casualties from wounds, Allied soldiers actually suffered more heavily from sickness, including trench foot, an affliction not seen since the First World War. Italy was a campaign in which infantry and artillery played an inordinately important role. The terrain and conditions were simply unsuitable for tanks, and they were used only occasionally, mainly in a support role. Offensives were carried by mass gunfire and by infantry, attacking over rough ground or through rubble-filled streets. During November and early December, the Allied infantry fought a series of such actions, evicting the Germans, sometimes at bayonet point, from their mountain redoubts and strongholds. On the Adriatic coast, 8th Army pushed across the River Trigno, and then the Sangro. West of the Apennines, 5th Army was inching its way into the mountains overlooking the plain of Naples. But in December, both forces were beginning to come up against the forward defences of the Gustav Line, the last and by far the most formidable of the German defensive lines south of Rome. The Gustav Line ran from Ortona on the Adriatic coast, along high ground dominating the valley of the River Sangro,